This is the third problem from Activity 2, Summer Jobs. These are Tyler's recipes. He has 2 recipes to make lemonade. One recipe is given to you as an equation, and the second recipe, that information for the second recipe, is given to you in a table. So here's the problems all laid out. Here's the table for recipe 2. Here's the equation for recipe number 1. And they're going to ask you, for 16 cups of mix, how many cups of water are you going to use for each recipe? Then they're going to ask you about the rate of change, or the unit rate. So what's the rate of change for recipe number 1? What's the rate of change for recipe number 2? And finally, this third problem is different than any problem that you've seen before. Basically, it's going to get at the question of, if you make your lemonade, how many total cups of lemonade do you have in the end after you've made that lemonade? So you have a certain number of cups of water, a certain number of cups of mix, you put them together, how many total cups do you have in the end? But first of all, let's look at the recipe number 1. Let's look at the equation, y equals 4x. Well, what does that mean in the context of lemonade mix and cups of water? So you know, go back to what you know that y equals kx, and k is the constant of proportionality. And they're telling you x is going to be the cups of lemonade, so x is going to be the mix, lemonade mix. So x is going to be the mix, and y is going to be the water. So I'm going to say w equals 4 times the amount of mix. And so what that tells you is that for every cup of mix, you use 4 times that amount of water. So the amount of water per mix is y over x. That's the number of units in the vertical direction compared to the number of units in the horizontal direction. So that equals 4. So you're going to use 4 times as much water as you are going to use mix. So remember, we started here and we went down this way, 4 times as much water as you use of mix. So 4 times as much water as you use of the mix. So that gives you this equation. The amount of water that you use is 4 times the amount of mix that you use. And if you put this into one of these slope triangles on a graph, you get this. And so this is along the horizontal direction is the cups of mix. So 1 cup of mix, you go out 1 unit, you're going to use 4 times that for the number of cups of water. So the number of units in the vertical direction is 4. So this point, notice this point is at 1. So 1 on the x-axis, or the mix, and 4 on the y-axis, or cups of water. All right, for the recipe number 2, let's get this one to that same slope triangle and its equation. So you start out with, you have mix on the left, and we know that mix is the x value, water is on the right is the y value. So y over x is the same as the constant of proportionality, w over m. So w in this case, the amount of water that you use for 10 cups of mix. So if you simplify that, you get down to 5. So the amount of water you use is going to be 5 times the amount of mix that you use. So look at these numbers right here. The amount of water that you use, 50, is 5 times the amount of mix that you use. So remember this equation, y equals kx. That k is the constant of proportionality. So y over x is going to give you this value of 5. So you use 5 times as much water as you use mix. That means going in the vertical direction, that the number of units in the vertical direction is 5 times the number of units in the horizontal direction. So for every amount of mix that you use, you're going to use 5 times that amount of water. That's why these all come out to equal 5. So the amount of water that you use is 5 times the amount of mix that you use. So 5 times the amount of mix gives you the amount of water. So if you compare both slope triangles, so this is the slope triangle for recipe 2. So 1 unit of mix, 1 cup of mix you're going to use 5 units of water, or 5 cups of water. So you're going to go out 1 cup and then up 5 cups. And this really light blue line here is for 4. It's just this over here, and I just put it right on top of it so you can see it. So the comment is water is 4 times the amount of mix. The equation is water is equal to 4 times whatever amount of mix you use. So I use 1 cup of mix, I need to use 4 cups of water. So water is 5 times the amount of mix. So I use 1 cup of mix. Now, it doesn't have to be a cup. It could be a glass, it could be a gallon, it could be a jug, whatever it is. But if you use 1 of those, then you have to use 5 of those for the amount of water. So you're going to use 5 times as much water. So how many cups of water would you need for 16 cups of mix? And then the rate of change. For 1 cup or 1 unit of mix, how much is the water changing? And we'll come back to see in a few moments. All right, so recipe number 1, this is what we got to just a moment ago. Water is equal to 4 times the amount of mix. Recipe number 2, water is equal to 5 times the amount of mix. Well, if that amount of mix is 16 cups, then the amount of water I need to use for recipe number 1 is 4 times that. Well, 4 times 16 is equal to 64 cups. And notice, to get the total amount of lemonade you've made, then you add the 64 plus 16, and that adds to 80. 60 plus 10 is 70. 6 plus 4 is another 10. So that adds to 80 total cups of lemonade that you make. Over here, if you use 16 cups of mix, you're going to use 5 cups of water. So this is going to be less concentrated, more dilute. So 5 times 16, you're going to use 80 cups of water. And so notice, if you add these two together, 80 plus 16 cups of water, it's going to give you 96 total cups of lemonade. So here you get 96 cups. Here you get 64 cups using the same amount of mix. And so you just have to decide based on the taste which one you're going to use. If you use this, if you like this taste over here, it's okay for you. Think you can sell that. Then you get more lemonade using this recipe. So that means you can get more, you can make more money if you sell them at the same price. All right, rate of change. The recipe on the left is 4 cups of water per 1 cup of mix. That is the rate of change. How much does the water change per 1 unit of mix? It changes by 4 units. The rate of change on the right side for recipe 2 is 5 cups of water for 1 cup of mix. So what's the rate of change? How much does it change for each cup of mix? It changes by 5 cups. This is 5 cups of water. This is 4 cups of water. So this is more concentrated. This is less concentrated. This is more lemony. This is less lemony. All right, this last part. You have to think about the total number of cups, or the total number of parts of lemonade that you make after you mix the cups of mix with the cups of water. That's what this question's getting to. And it's saying, how much of each do you need, or which would be better? So you have 16 cups of mix. Would it be better to make recipe number 1, or would it be better to make recipe number 2? In both cases, you're going to end up with 80 total cups. So we'll go through the math a little bit, but the layout of this problem is that you have 16 cups. You can make up to 80 cups total of total lemonade. That's a mix of both water and mix, combination of both water and mix. So you have to think about the total number of cups you're putting into that container. So the total number of cups for just 1 cup of mix is 5 cups of liquid. So for recipe 1. So it's 4 cups of water plus 1 cup of mix. That adds together to give you 5 total cups of liquid. And for recipe number 2, you have 1 cup of mix, but you have 5 cups of water. So this gives you a total of 6 cups of liquid. So recipe number 2, you get more liquid, and we saw that before. You get more liquid if you use the same amount of mix. So this is 6 total cups of liquid. Recipe number 1 is 5 total cups of liquid using just 1 cup of mix. A little drawing. So we talk about parts in this case because it doesn't necessarily have to just be cups. As a matter of fact, in this problem they talk about a 5-gallon jug. So you can use 80 cups. You can think of it as 80 cups of lemonade or a 5-gallon jug. And so that's made up of 4 parts of water for recipe number 1, 4 parts of water, so 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, and 1 part of the mix. So that comes, this is the constant proportionality right here. It's 4. So 4 cups of water and 1 cup of mix. 4 cups of water and 1 cup of mix. I don't think we've seen this before, where there's parts to give you a total. So this is 5 parts for recipe number 2. 5 parts water, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's like 5 cups of water and 1 part of mix. It's 1 cup of mix. So this is going to be 6 cups total. This one on the left, recipe number 1, is going to be 5 cups total. And in the end, you're going to make 80 total cups of lemonade. All right, so this recipe is 5 cups for each allotment, each part of the lemonade that you make. So you have to figure out how many of those 5 cups total fit into 80 cups. And over here, you have to figure out how many of those 6 cups total fit into 80 cups. That's going to tell you how much to make. All right, so you take the 80 total, you're going to end up with an amount of 80 total cups. Well, if you divide that by 5, that tells you how much each part is equal to. So I'm dividing 80 by 5, these 5. I want to know the amount for each of these parts. 4 of those are going to be water. 1 of them is going to be the mix. And so 80 divided by 5 is 16. So I can use all 16 cups that I have, throw them into the container, add 64 cups of water. 4 times 16, so you need 4 times as much water. It's going to give me 64 cups of water. Add the 64 cups of water, and I make 80 total cups of lemonade. On the right side, if you take that 80 cups and you divide it now by 6, because you want to know there's 6 equal parts, you want to know what the volume is for each one of these parts. You're going to use 5 of them for water and 1 of them for the mix. So you need to know how many times you can do that. So 80 divided by 6, these 6 parts, gives you 13 1/3. That tells you how much volume, how much you're going to use for each one of these parts. 13 1/3, 13 1/3, 13 1/3, 13 1/3, 13 1/3, 13 1/3. You add all those together, 6 times 13 1/3 will equal 80. 6 times that 13 1/3 will equal this 80. So the water part is going to be 5 of those 13 1/3 parts. So 5 times 13 1/3 is equal to 66 2/3 cups of water. So you use 66 2/3 cups of water. How much to bring that up to the 80 total cups? How much mix do you add? You add 13 1/3 cups of mix. That's this last part. Remember, each of these parts are equal to 13 1/3 cups. This can get confusing if you don't go through it very slowly. So the water is 5 of those 13 1/3, and the mix is 1 more of those 13 1/3. So 66 2/3 plus this 13 1/3, that's going to make this total amount equal to 80 cups. That's going to fill the container. And notice you're not using as much lemonade mix, and we know that recipe 2 is not as lemony, it's not as concentrated. So that makes sense. You're not putting as much mix in there. But notice, if you use recipe 2, you have an extra 2 2/3 cups of mix left over for the next day. You're not using all your 16 cups. So maybe it's better to make recipe number 2, because you have some mix left over that you can use for the next day. That's the same as saying that it's not as concentrated. So the amount of mix, whatever amount of mix that you have, it's going to go farther. You're going to be able to make more lemonade because you're not using as much mix each time. So 66 2/3 plus 13 1/3 equals this 80 cups, and you have 2 2/3 cups of mix left over for the next day. Recipe number 1, you use it all up. 16 cups of lemonade mix plus 64 cups of water equals a total of 80 cups. So you fill up that jug. And the ratio, just to review once again, the ratio is 4:1 for recipe number 1. This is the constant proportionality. So that's the same as 64:16. 4 times 16 is equal to 64. This is a ratio of 5:1. 66 2/3 to 13 1/3. So 5 times 13 1/3 is equal to 66 2/3. Here's one last look at the constant proportionality. So for every 1 cup of mix, there are 4 cups of water in recipe number 1. So this is the unit rate. 1 cup of mix, 4 cups of water. The unit rate for recipe 2, 1 cup of mix, 5 cups of water. So the amount of water that gets used in recipe number 2 is 5 times the amount of the mix. So water is equal to 5 times mix. Recipe number 1, the amount of water used in recipe number 1 is 4 times the amount of mix. So the amount of water is equal to 4 times the mix. So the equation, the unit rate, the equation, and the unit rate or constant proportionality.